Hi, welcome to our program. My name is Francisco Morales Barrón, and I'm a partner in the M&A and private equity group in our New York office. I'm also a member of the firm's AI task force, and this coming spring semester, I'm going to be teaching a class at Penn Carey School of Law on Gen AI in corporate law. I have three objectives for today's presentation. First, even though you probably heard it a bazillion times, I want to go back to what is generative AI and what's special about it. Then I'm going to talk about how we're viewing Gen AI in legal services, some of the tools that we have, and I will give a few demonstrations that I came up with. Then finally, we're going to talk about the limitations of Gen AI and what are professional responsibility considerations associated with Gen AI. Since ChatGPT was launched by OpenAI in November 2022, millions and millions of users have used it. I think everyone in the legal industry has been told this may be the end of us, or this may make our lives so much easier. Professor Perlman from the Suffolk University of Law School said, for the legal industry, ChatGPT may portend an even more momentous shift than the advent of the internet. Similarly, Goldman did a research in which they laid out which were the industries that could be most affected and automated by Gen AI. This study concluded that at least 44% of legal tasks could be made significantly more efficient through the use of Gen AI and other AI technologies. Goldman was actually optimistic about it, and they came to the conclusion that if LLMs can handle routine and repetitive tasks, it will enable us legal professionals to do more complex and strategic aspects of our work and ultimately enhance the overall quality of our legal services. So, what is AI? Let's start first with AI. AI is, in essence, a software or hardware that can learn to solve complex problems, make predictions, or undertake tasks that require human like sensing. AI is not new. It has been around since the 1950s and is incorporated in most computer programs we use daily. AI sets the price of whatever you pay on Amazon. It lets you know what you should watch next on Netflix, what podcasts to listen to, and it identifies what's spam in your inbox. It is not until the last 10 to 15 years, when there has been massive improvements on AI, that it has really captured our attention as AI starts to do tasks at the same level as, or even better than humans. The original examples were like the chess playing machines, the Go playing machines, and then 2 years ago, of course, ChatGPT. So, what is all the buzz about generative AI? Gen AI, in essence, is AI that when given a prompt, it uses patterns it has learned from a given data set to generate new outputs, producing new creative and novel outputs. It can answer questions, it can create stories, it can have a conversations, but its responses, most importantly, are based on patterns it has seen on its training data. I do want to go through a few glossary items that may be useful for you to know about Gen AI. First, we have machine learning, which is basically the technique that enables all of these to learn and adapt without following explicit instructions. It is what it is named after. The machine learns on its own. Then we have LLMs, or large language models, which predict and generate human language. An LLM is basically a subset of Gen AI. And what we mostly use in the legal industry on the Gen AI front is going to be LLMs. Then we have natural language processing. And what this is basically what has allowed the LLMs to just answer questions from a human that go naturally. We no longer need to know coding in order to ask a question to the computer. And finally, we have retrieval augmented generation, RAG. And this is a technique for enhancing the accuracy and reliability of the Gen AI. It basically pulls from a proven set of documents. For example, if any one of you have used it so far, you can think of the Gen AI tools in Westlaw or Lexis that are only pulling from the actual data set, as opposed to ChatGPT that pulls from a lot of different items. And this data set is continuously renewing, again, as opposed to ChatGPT that which was originally trained on a data set that is now stale. So how does machine learning work? I really like this graph because this graph basically highlights the idea that garbage in equals garbage out. In other words, the quality of any one LLM will depend on its training stimulus, that is to say, whatever data was given to it. So in the training phase, which is what the Claudes, the ChatGPTs, the Llamas, etc., are doing, you just generate this massive data set in which you train the model and then you have feedback and you train the model again and so on and so forth. It requires an enormous amount of energy, enormous amount of data to collect, but it's faster and faster the process in which we manage to do that today. Then the second phase is, or not the second phase, but rather once you use it, the execution phase is how it works. You give it a stimulus that it runs by the model and it gives you a prediction. What we otherwise known as you prompt it and it gives you an output. And again, this also shows one of the biggest issues with Gen AI, and that is that every time you ask it a question, Gen AI will want to give you an answer. It's like the most overzealous junior associate you may have ever seen, who, when he doesn't even know the answer, will still want to give you an answer. So we have had this explosion of Gen AI applications throughout different spaces, including in the legal world. And why is this? Well, we don't need an elaborate training set to do this. It has terrific performance on general purposes tasks. You can fine tune it for certain tasks. And to be honest, there's no clear upper limit on performance today. If anything, the limits seem to be of computing and eventually maybe power usage of the Gen AI. So in this environment, over the last almost since basically the adoption of ChatGPT, VNE has assembled a task force that is actively studying this technology and exploring various subscription-based generative AI platforms, both those aimed exclusively for legal domain and those that just generally make our administrative lives easier. I'm not trying to endorse any tools here, but I just want to give you an idea of the multiple tools of Gen AI that are available today for legal usage. You have what I would deem the legal assistants like Harvey, a co-counsel, that basically aim to do whatever task it is that you would want your junior associates, your associates to do for you. You have the more research specialized tools, Lexis AI Plus and Westlaw that do case law research. You have the contract management tools are probably more useful for the corporate legal departments than the law firms necessarily, unless the law firm is doing a huge document review. You have the litigation support companies, you have the DMS management, and of course, all of these work on top of whatever is the latest model or whatever model they have licenses to. So how can Gen AI be used in the legal services? I've been listening to several heads of corporate legal departments, and what I find the most interesting at this point in the trajectory of Gen AI is the very different approach that I think the corporate legal department has towards Gen AI versus the law firm. The corporate legal departments are generally under humongous strains, both a ton of time that they need and fewer resources and fewer personnel. So they're very enthusiastic, both anecdotally and in surveys, about adoption of Gen AI technologies. They viewed it as cost effective. It's going to allow them to leverage Gen AI to allow the department to handle even a higher volume of work and hopefully let you leave work a little earlier, not work over the weekends. Um, then, then you have the law firm model, right? And the law firm, I think, has two different set of tools that it's considering. One is the set of tools that it's going to make our administrative matters easier. So say, for example, tools that may be able to automatically tell you what are the billables that you did over the last year, or tools that will help you mine your data sets in order to find um, potential business development leads. But more importantly, and I think what most of you will care about, is tools that will aid us in the practice of law. So what happens with implementation strategy here? I think the corporates will try to find a Gen AI that works into their systems, probably like a Gen AI CRM type of tool that will enhance their contract management, KM, compliance, and document review processes. The law firms, on the other hand, they're going to be more cautious. We're going to start pilot programs or have been starting pilot programs. They're going to review different tools. They're going to test their effectiveness and reliability. They're going to try to assume how Gen AI, what are the best uses for Gen AI for the client. And eventually, and some firms are already doing it, you will generate custom solutions as you identify problems that are most relevant to your specific set of clients. Again, some key observations about Gen AI in the legal services. I think LLMs excel at basically tasks that are repetitive, data intensive, and require pattern recognition. So legal research, they're pretty good at, particularly when you're asking them to find relevant case law and statutes. Document drafting, we're going to dive into a few examples. I think it's not, honestly, I don't think it's there yet for like long contracts, but if you have to write like a 3-page purchase agreement, a 5-page NDA with not a lot of complexity, it is good at that. I find it even more useful, as we will see, in drafting provisions. It is fairly useful at contract analysis, particularly when you don't give it a massive set of contracts to analyze. If you give it one contract that you need to basically run Q&As on, the Gen AI tends to be very spot on. Even when you give it massive doc reviews, exercises, I've had mixed results. I have tested Gen AI versus the output of what my associates have done. I would say the Gen AI is 60 to 70% there. It's never 100% there. There are nuances and contextual issues that the Gen AI misses. Again, due diligence. And then we have legal writing and analysis. What can't the LLMs do? Well, perhaps you're going to say it's obvious, but it's the complex legal reasoning, the contextual understanding, ethical judgments, emotional intelligence, ability to communicate with the client. Although some think that eventually both the lawyer and the client may be Gen AI and they're just going to be better at communicating to each other and finding creative problem solving issues. So I'm going to walk you through a few Gen AI demonstrations. But before I do that, I wanted to just give you a primer on prompt writing. I think this is probably one of the most important tasks that we should work, particularly with junior associates, to learn how to do. I wouldn't be surprised if even in schools, students are learning how to just do prompt. And this is my cheat sheet that I've had and I've seen others use. Um, and basically, we start by clearly explaining the task. Think about this as your action verb. Summarize the following text. Analyze. Um, find the following type of law. Then you provide context. Uh, this memo is intended for a general counsel with limited experience in IP, so write it accordingly. Define to the Gen AI what success would look like. Give it examples. You can say like, they should be drafted in the voice of a New York corporate law partner, so obnoxious and highfalutin. Um, Specify the output of the format. Say it should be a table. It should be uh, less than 2 sentences, less than 500 words. It should be bullet points. Just think about how it is that you want it to be. And finally, you can play with the tone. Make it informal, make it formal, make it professional, and the like. I would say that these are laid out in level of importance, and you don't need to hit each one of them every time you write a prompt. And this would help you um, to do your work, and it also helps you when you're prompting Gen AI generally. I, as a New York lawyer who was raised in in New York practice, I know that my emails, when I send them to people, they tend to be very terse, very short and abrupt, and people often find me rude, even though I think I'm not. So I every once in a while will send it to an LLM and say like, hey, make this slightly more professional and slightly more warm. And it does a good job at it. So the first prompt exercise that I wanted to run here was I wanted to show you where I think it does a very decent job. And look at the prompt. It's in less than 200 words, describe the fiduciary obligations of a director of a Delaware corporation that is contemplating a sale process. Draft this as a corporate lawyer trying to give to a board member who has no legal experience a quick overview of this. If you have any familiarity with Delaware law, I think you would agree that this basically hits the target. And it's not surprised. Think about the slide that we had earlier about how the models are trained. If you have established principles of law, it is very likely that the model was trained with multiple case law, with multiple legal texts and precedents, which had all identified what were the main principles applying to this item. So, not surprisingly, in 30 seconds, the Gen AI model gives you a very good answer. So you have the duty of care and the duty of loyalty, and this is how you exercise the duty of care and the duty of loyalty. It kind of doesn't address Revlon to the extent that I would want it to address, but those are nuances, and I also only gave it 200 words. Maybe if I said write it in 1,000 words, it would have dived into Revlon and maximizing shareholder value and the like. At the end of the day, I don't think any one of us would have been able to write this in the amount of time and with these directions that it required the Gen AI to do. And this, but of course, there are nuances, and that's where the expertise of the lawyer comes in, and the lawyer says like, okay, yeah, but we need to describe these other nuances. Next, another area that I think the AI is making strides is in the drafting. I've seen a lot of tools that claim to be able to draft an agreement. To be honest, I'm yet to see a well-written, full-length agreement. What I do think it does an okay job at is drafting provisions for agreements, particularly when you draft a provision, particularly when you have a bespoke type of provision and it's harder to like find the exact precedent that you want, but you need a starting point. So here I tried the following prompt we're representing the buyer of a widget manufacturing company, draft a buyer-friendly earnout provision that pays the earnout if during fiscal year 2025 the target's EBITDA increases by 20%. I don't know if anyone has had the time to look at the answer that it gave. It's okay. I think all the plumbing that you need for an earnout is there, but I would, if I were like teaching in a class and I had as an associate, or if I had as a junior associate to draft this for me, I would fail them or I would give them a C minus because it's missing the most important aspect of the prompt, and that is make a buyer-friendly earnout provision. And if you know what a buyer-friendly earnout provision would entail, here they should have made what's EBITDA 100% clear. I think more importantly, they should have disclaimed any duties to the sellers that they would try to maximize the earnout. They should have made clear that the buyer has full control of the company during the earnout period. And there's a lot of bells and whistles missing. Um, Again, this could be just related to the fact that whatever the LLM was trained on doesn't have that level of specificity, or the LLM doesn't understand what is a buyer-friendly earnout provision. I would be a little bit surprised because there is a lot of memos out there as to how to write a better earnout provision. Maybe my prompt could have been better. I could always reprompt the LLM and say like, no, try again. You need to do this aspect of the law. So, and I wanted to clarify, I'm not going to say which LLM I'm using here, but it is a legal oriented LLM. I just want you all to get a sense of what it is, the type of work they're capable of doing today. It's not like I was running this on a generic ChatGPT question. Now, I felt a little bad for the GAI for failing them, so I decided to throw it a softball. And more specifically, I threw a softball with regards to what I think the Gen AI truly does a splendid job, and that is at summarizing contracts, but more specifically, summarizing provisions of contracts. Here I uploaded an LLC agreement to the model, and I asked it to summarize the waterfall of the LLC. And honestly, I think I did. And if you can see, the query is fairly simple. It's like, in simple terms, describe how the waterfall in Section 501 would work. And it does the job at laying out specifically how the waterfall works, laying out the math of the waterfall, and also providing the objective of why the waterfall works that way. I honestly think that this is the area where currently the LLMs do the best job. The problem is, like, if you think about it from the law firm model, or even there's not a lot to gain out of this. Yes, it helps us to be like maybe 10% faster, but it's not like it's not going to generate a lot of work or new cash flows. Again, even this, though, is not without perils. The Gen AI could have missed key legal aspects that are implicit in the document. It could have missed cross references that are not obvious on their face. It could have missed a more recent legal case that may have changed the interpretation of how the waterfall works. So, again, this is why we need the attorney with the knowledge to verify the work that we have received. The other type of example that I wanted to show was the Gen AI, the LLMs, as a an analyst, legal writer, legal thinker, someone or something that can help you think through issues that you may face. And here I uploaded the Twitter merger agreement. And I asked it in 200 words or less, describe the three main arguments that parent, so the Musk company, should make if it is seeking to terminate the merger, because Twitter allegedly misrepresented how Twitter measured spam bot problem. At a two-sentence conclusion on the likelihood on whether the Delaware Chancery Court would grant such remedy. The model gave me, I think, the three main arguments that, if memory serves, Skadden made on behalf of Musk: a breach of rep and warranties, an MAE, failure to comply with the IOCs, and worded in similar terms. I do wonder whether the model was actually trained on memos that analyzed Twitter, so it might be cheating here. And I would be curious, unfortunately, I don't think I can test that, how the model would have done if I had just uploaded the Twitter merger agreement to it without knowing that it didn't have any data in it as to what was the outcome of the Twitter transaction. I did ask it to give me a conclusion whether in the Delaware Chancery it would be a successful claim or a non-successful claim. And the model did say, we don't think it's going to be a successful claim. The model didn't tell me, like, by the way, it was not a successful claim and they had to settle it and it didn't go through. But it shows the current strength already of the models and how they're working today. So now that we've talked about everything that's great about the Gen AI, let's take a few minutes to talk about what are the risks that are associated with Gen AI. What are the professional responsibility that lawyers need to face, and where I think it might go and issues that it might generate. So you may all recall that last year already, after ChatGPT 4 came out, there was a group of intellectuals and technology leaders through the Future of Life Institute that called on all the people creating GPTs and LLMs to pause their experimentation, and in order to better assess how powerful these tools were becoming. Some of the signatories were Yoshua Bengio, Stuart Russell, Elon Musk, Steve Wozniak, Yuval Noah Harari, and they had the concerns that, like, should we let machines flood our information channels with propaganda and untruth? Should we automate away all the jobs, including the fulfilling ones? What are we going to inhibit the development of the human mind? And they said powerful AI systems should be developed only once we're confident that their effects will be positive and their risks will be manageable. I don't know if you've been following it, but I don't think anyone halted the development of GPTs. DeepMind, OpenAI, both actually came very strongly against this, and even some of the signatories have created their own models that don't seem to have any ethical guidelines to it. So now let's talk about the reliability issues of Gen AI. One that you've probably heard about is the bias. And that is a problem that, like, LLMs are built on data sets that in and of themselves could be biased. And I'm not only talking about, like, bias against, like, certain people, which they could actually, but it's also bias from, like, a more statistical analysis, that they're not viewing all of the information together. So if they're not viewing the entire universe of the information, the data will continue to skew towards one aspect. These can be solved in certain instances when, for example, we can say, like, run a model that looks at all Delaware jurisdiction. Maybe we could solve the bias with that aspect. The GPTs have technical limitations. If there's an issue with the algorithm, with the data source, with the hardware, it could generate issues that honestly we may or may not be able to catch. It is open to misinterpretation, particularly misinterpretation by the users who might not fully understand what it is that the model is giving them and how it is that the model developed the answer that they're getting. The GPTs have a lack of explanation. They're not going to tell you a clear explanation of how the output was generated. And probably the most famous example of the reliability issues of Gen AI is the hallucinations. And that is to say, it might make up stuff just to give you the answer that you're seeking for. This happens in different instances. You have hallucinations when there's a complex context. So the correct answer would require knowledge of the specific context of the question. You can have hallucinations when the model lacks the primary case law in the training data. So the publicly available ChatGPT, it's outdated. It wasn't uploaded with all the legal cases in the world. And that's why we have lawyers that when they ran prompts and created cases, you end up with like made up citations. They can also generate hallucinations because of multi-part reasoning, and that's particularly in the cases where a prompt requires several steps, logical steps, in order to get to an answer. If along the way the model gets the wrong answer, it's just not going to correct itself. And there's also the issue that could generate from non-semantic information. That is to say, when the AI, when the answer relies on information that's not depending on a semantic context, think about like a case citation, right? I I've made it a little bit of my practice nowadays to run my questions, my thoughts through uh, Gen AI models and and think about what it is that it gives me. So I asked the LLM, I was like, what do you think are the biggest risks of using LLM in legal practice? Accuracy and reliability. We've discussed those. Confidentiality and privacy. We will discuss those soon. Ethical considerations. So biases and fairness. This is true, like unethical biases. They can perpetuate existing biases against certain groups. Um, it may generate issues of accountability, hard to say who had the drafting error, or generate unethical behaviors. Dependence and skill degradation is one of the aspects that he talked about. Cost and resource allocation. So this is specifically for the law firm model, and the LLM said like, yeah, well, it is fairly expensive to license this. So how is like the cost going to be allocated? There's also, and I'm not going to dive into this, the environmental implications of the use of Gen AI. Each time you run a prompt, you're probably using a large amount of power, and the legal and regulatory risks. The one aspect here that I wanted to dive a little bit more into is this like idea of dependence and skill degradation. And I think there's like two ways we can think about what Gen AI might do to the legal profession 5 years out, 10 years out. We have the negative view of it, and the negative view would be like, look, lawyers' skills are going to degrade. They're going to become over reliant on the tools. They will reduce their own deep legal research and critical thinking. Over time, they're going to be less proficient in drafting. We're going to be less proficient in handling new and complex cases. Think about how people are saying today that a lot of students, even those students that go to colleges, can't read novels anymore. And then there's a counter argument that goes back to even the study of Goldman that we started with, and that is Gen AI is going to unshackle the lawyer. It's going to enhance the lawyer's skills by allowing them to focus on more complex and strategic aspects of their work rather than routine tasks. It's going to allow us to spend more time mentoring our associates, our juniors, in rather than having them spend hours and hours in a data room going through documents, trying to summarize change of control provisions that we have always told our junior associates, like, oh, it's so important for you to do this because this is how you learn. This is how you see how language is drafted. But in all honesty, is it that important to read 5,000 contracts specifically for a change of control provision in order to become a better lawyer? I'm not sure. I would say that I fall more in the optimistic view that Gen AI will enable lawyers to focus on what truly matters for their clients, and it's going to allow us to spend more of our intellectual power and fresh mindset in coming with new solutions for our clients. That said, I do think that eventually Gen AI is likely to upend the the legal model, and it will be interesting to see what happens with gigantic uh, law firms. Professional responsibility. On July 29, 2024, so this summer, the ABA Standing Committee on Ethics and Professional Responsibility issued Formal Opinion 512. It's basically on Gen AI intelligence tools. The opinion offers a useful compilation of ethical guidance key to the model rules of professional conduct. What I find the most interesting about this opinion is that it really didn't generate any new rules of professional conduct. It just relied on the existing rules that were already applicable to lawyers. It delved into different aspects, but since I'm a corporate lawyer, I focus on four of the aspects that it discussed more profoundly. First is the duty of competence. ABA Model Rule 1.1 indicates that a lawyer shall not accept or continue employment in a legal matter which the lawyer knows or should know is beyond the lawyer's competence. So, what is the AI risk, if not obvious? The AI tools generate what appears to be valuable outputs with minimal attorney guidance, which can lead to undesired outcomes and potential liabilities. It might even make the lawyers think that they know something that they truly do not know and shouldn't be opining on. So what are the mitigations for this risk? I think the main mitigation is to a combination of ongoing training on AI systems and the specific applications where those AI systems are used. Lawyers must independently verify and review the output of GAI, and most importantly, GAI tools can assist but not replace the judgment of experience necessary for competent legal advice. Then we have the duty of confidentiality. So ABA Model Rule 1.6a says a lawyer shall not reveal information relating to the representation of a client. What are the AI risks? Many AI tools are premium products with weak data privacy and security protections. And moreover, these freemium models are oftentimes trained on whatever information it is that you're providing into it. So what are the mitigations that one can employ? Honestly, the risks of Gen AI are not fundamentally different than risks faced with other outside vendors. Think about our cloud suppliers. It's not like our data is all secured in a physical location. Our data is already all through the cloud, and that's how most of the businesses nowadays operate. So the key becomes in reviewing the vendor's security, audit, and contracting, truly trying to understand what are their terms, and never using consumer products for professional purposes. The next duty that has always been existing is the duty of communication. That is ABA Model Rule 1.4, which says a lawyer shall explain a matter to the extent reasonably necessary to permit the client to make informed decisions regarding the representation. So what is the quote unquote AI risk here? And is that the lawyer, to the extent that they use AI, should consider whether the model rules require them to disclose the use of JI in the representation. Even the opinion concludes that this is fact specific and gives certain guidelines saying lawyers must disclose their JI practices if asked by a client how they conducted their work, or if client asks whether JI technologies were employed in doing so. Lawyers also, the opinion says, should disclose when the GenAI output was influential in important decision making of the representation. Now, the last item that the opinion discusses that I found particularly interesting was the fees. And ABA Model Rule 1.5a says a lawyer shall not make an agreement for charge or collect an unreasonable fee or an unreasonable amount for expenses. And although these tools provide lawyers with an ability to be much faster and more efficient in the ways that we render legal services to our clients, lawyers who bill clients on an hourly rate for time spent on a matter must bill for their actual time. So, unfortunately, we cannot just say, hey, this GenAI product or GenAI product was like equivalent of 1,000 associate hours, so we're going to charge you 1,000 associate hours. According to the ABA model rules, that will not fly. They'd also say that like, if it's AI that is used just for corporate overhead, it should not be charged to the client unless it's clear in whatever is charged to the client that they're being charged for the corporate overhead that the GenAI tool did. But it does make clear that when you use GenAI, say, for example, to review thousands of documents in a doc review and the like, you can come up with like what should be a reasonable amount to charge to your client and discuss it with your clients. Again, I think in the litigation world, and sorry for those litigators in the call that my presentation has been fairly corporate biased. There's still general consensus, particularly among judges, that GenAI should be at limited use, or whenever used, the client should make very clear that GenAI was used and why they think that the result of the GenAI was appropriate. This all emanated from the Avianca case, where one of the lawyers submitted a brief that basically had a ton of hallucinations, and he cited legal documents that never existed. So where are we today? I think today we're at a state in which GenAI requires human review. Absolutely everything that GenAI produces must be validated, validated. But still leaves a lot of unanswered questions. What does our workflow look like? How this is gonna change in the future? Then we have a near future, which I don't view it within the next 5 years, maybe near future in the 10 years, where we have like human augmented review, and it's more of an autonomous process, and the Gen AI is truly doing more like true legal services, and you just have a human there to balance the output and check the output. And then I think, I hope, for my own, uh, for the uh, for the good of my kids, that we don't have a fully automated review until much in the future. I think it would require a big technological step for us to get there in the legal world. And even once we do, as we discussed from the beginning, there are certain other aspects that I just don't think that the Gen AI will be able to capture. Uh, Client development, creativity, thinking out of the box, and the like. I do think that what Gen AI is going to enable us is to produce more, probably. So we talked about the security and privacy concerns. I do want to reiterate that it is important for lawyers at law firms and probably lawyers at corporate departments not to use the publicly available Gen AI tools for any type of professional work. You're feeding that in. You're feeding whatever information you're providing to the model, and the security systems are not the most vetted. So as we encourage our associates and how our policy is, we only allow the use of licensed models that has been vetted by our security department. Even then, be careful about what data you share with an LLM. We have vetted the security of the tools we use, but our prompts are not training the model and our data is not being shared. But as we have been discussing, even the licensed AI tools are just tools and should be viewed as means to support and amplify your work and not to do it for you. All outputs must be validated. So lessons learned and what I think are the best practices that we can derive today from Gen AI. I think Gen AI is great to like quickly prototype, test your ideas, come up with a draft. If you're having writer's block, help it get you over the hump. Rethink your limits. If there's a new skill that you wanted to task, use the Gen AI tools in order to research and study it. Use it as a like a study buddy. Like ask like if you want to get better at understanding how warrants work. There are tools out there that you can start asking like, hey, how does a warrant work, and what is the dilution, and what are the best practices, and you can use it like as a study model. Um, I think it also allows you to rethink your limits as to what it is that you may or may not have had time to work. Personally, I've always wanted to teach a class. I never thought I would have the time to teach a class. I had made myself a note since like 7 years ago that I would draft, I would start with drafting a syllabus that I would eventually shop, and I never got around to do it. One day I just said on the screen, I was like, okay, let's run a Gen AI test and to see how it does the syllabus. It did it, and then I had to review it. And honestly, the end syllabus looks nothing like what the Gen AI produced, but it did help me get over that writer's block. Uh, Resist distraction. There's a ton that you can do, but maybe you shouldn't do everything. Focus on what you think is best. This is here to help you, not to do your homework. Um, think in sequences when you're interacting with the Gen AI. Ask it a question. If you don't like the answer, requery the question and try it. And then as some of the models allow you to dig in and dig in and dig in into your question, uh, pretend it's sentient. Use Gen AI as a colleague, not a machine, as crazy as that sounds. It makes it a little bit easier to interact with. But ultimately, particularly where we are at today, fact check everything. We do have time for Q&A, so if anyone has any questions. I did notice someone asked me, if you're using Gen AI as a study companion, how do you know it's accurate? That is a fairly good question. I think it depends on two things. One is what tool it is that you're using, so that if, for example, if you're using one of the tools from Westlaw and Lexis and you limit its data set to the practical law, then you can see whether it's truthful or not. A lot of the models today actually will quote where it is that they're pulling the information from. So I think that the best practice would be to both look at the summary, but validate the summary through the going through the sources that it uses and is citing. It's very much like how you would review the work of any one of your junior associates. Yeah, I'm seeing here, can you ask GenAI to footnote? Yes, some of the GenAI models do have include footnotes. Can we get a copy of our slides? Kaylin, do we make our slides available?
Yes, we'll make the slides available.
Thank you very much. What do I think of some of the free models, ChatGPT, OpenAI? I assume that these are higher risk for pulling inaccurate data or confidentiality concerns. Yes, without a doubt. Like, there's two problems with the models. I don't know. They have cutoffs as when the information was provided, and they might not be trained on the information that's more relevant to you. There are confidentiality concerns because they're being trained on the information that you're uploading it to them. So for all the reasons that you say, I would not encourage the public models for any professional type of work. Our clients put in limit on the use of AI and the input or information into AI models in the V&E engagement letters. I do think different clients have addressed it differently. So we do have clients that talk about how they expect us to use our Gen AI models and their client guidelines that have that. Which Gen AI tools has the firm vetted, green-lighted for the purposes of assisted legal tasks? We have access to Westlaw and Lexis AI. We have access to Harvey, and those are like the main models. We're also vetting litigation type of Gen AI models. Do you think law firms will start to consider engagements that expressly include requirements to use AI for cost savings? Yes, I do think that eventually law firms will have to do this. I still think it's an interesting proposition. I was at a talk in which um, the corporate department, the general counsels were saying, well, yeah, obviously law firms don't want to start doing this because it's gonna hit their billable hours. I honestly think that the concern right now is one of the everyone is vetting the models and trying to understand its best uses and what's truly best for the client. So I think we are at a stage that's a little bit too premature to be at like you have to use Gen AI for this specific Tesla tool, but maybe in the near future we'll be there. What is the most common question from clients regarding the use of Gen AI? I think the most common question is like, are you using Gen AI? And if so, how? Uh, and I try to give some examples for you all to see how it is that we are using Gen AI to some degree. How do you anticipate dealing with clients, courts, or other firms who may use an AI detector of materials provided? I think that particularly when you're providing for court documents, you need to disclose that Gen AI has been used. Even with client work, it's probably best practices to disclose that Gen AI had been used. I don't see why would be the concern that like whether there's a detector that says Gen AI was provided. The most important thing is that a human reviewed and vetted the information and the information is correct. It's honestly not very different that like if you ask the first, second year associate to draft a memo, you're not going to send that to your client without thorough review and vetting. Someone tells me that if you treat the AI as a person by saying thank you, please, makes the AI to work better. I don't know. I'll defer to the Google engineer who said that. I do tend to be fairly courteous, at least in my prompt writing. I don't know if you noticed that when you were reviewing. Um, If you put legal opinion from outside counsel into an AI model, with the attorney-client privilege be compromised? It's a very fair question for which I'm not gonna lie, I don't know the answer, and I'm definitely gonna dig into that, Philip. I, I honestly, I feel like it shouldn't because it's not something that ever leaves or is ever going to somewhere else, particularly when we have a license tool. So it's akin of putting it on like when you put a Word document in the cloud, like that's all that happens. So I don't see why attorney-client privilege should be waived, but there's people who are probably better experts at that than I am, and I would love to discuss it with them. Um, any other questions? Well, if not, as Kaylin said, we'll make our slides available. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach me. You can find me on LinkedIn or just on our firm website, Francisco Morales Barrón. Thank you all and have a good day.